Hello? Oh, hi. I didn't know if this was on. Good afternoon. Hi. I think I'm just waiting for the green light to get started.
Green light.
Good to go? Great. Welcome, everyone. How are you today? Good. So, thank you for being here. This is very exciting. My name is Stacy Wilson Hunt. I'm an entertainment journalist based here in LA. And before we want to get started, I wanted to say that we are broadcasting live, as you know, from the Cinemark Playa Vista Theater to 500 theaters around the United States. So be on your best behavior, please. No shouting and saying strange things from the audience. So we are here to celebrate the movie Bombshell, which you are just about to see. It's an incredible film with an incredible message. So we'll try to stay away from too many spoilers, but we will have a fascinating conversation for sure. So please help me welcome to the stage John Lithgow and Charlize Theron.
Everybody.
That's a nice welcome, huh?
Happy New Year, happy Sunday afternoon.
Thank you, Uncle John.
Thank you both for being here. I know it's a busy day. You have Critics' Choice this afternoon as well, so best of luck in advance on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this week was remarkable sort of in the Bombshell universe because Megyn Kelly, for the first time in a meaningful way, sort of addressed the movie, and she actually released this. Have you seen the video that Megyn released this week? It's really wonderful, so check it out after you see the film. It was a YouTube video that she created, hosted by her, in which she spoke to former Fox employees Rudy Batikar, Juliet Huddy, Julie Zan, and Megyn's own husband, Doug Brunt, were in the video. And Megyn talked about her reaction to the film. And she said, I love the part, she said, I can't comment on Charlize's performance, but she's very talented, so that's nice. But at one point, there is a meaningful moment where Megyn actually breaks down and says to herself, I should have done more to help my colleagues, which for me felt really special and also speaks to the impact that this movie can have. So generally, I would love to know what your thoughts were on the video, which I think were mostly positive for the most part.
Yeah, in that moment you just talked about, I thought was very sincere. It was just one of those emotional moments that I felt you could feel something really painful there, and you know, I think for me it was really emotional, and you guys really should check it out because, you know, these are the real women who experienced the story you're about to see, and you know, no matter where you land on how you feel about them as newscasters or the fact that they worked at Fox or what your political persuasion is, you know, there's something really emotional to watch a group of women like that talk about something that so deeply affected them and will for the rest of their lives.
Well, their careers ended in many cases because
That's what's so heart-wrenching, because they're all incredibly ambitious women. They're really good at their jobs. They wanted to be the best at their jobs, and a lot of them never worked in broadcast again. They lost everything. And I think that just tells us so much about how devastating sexual harassment in the workplace is for women, because it's not small by any means. It's life-changing and life-altering. And besides the scars that you keep from the actual event or several events, it's the fact that your career is completely over. You have to risk so much. And you know, Juliet Huddy said she lost her house. She lost everything, like literally lost everything. So it is really devastating.
And another moment that really struck me was when one of them said, this movie really shows how it feels to be harassed. And you'll see there are a number of really wrenching scenes in which you place yourself in the shoes of the person being harassed and you think, what would I do in this situation? And that's why it's so painful, because you're paralyzed. Because intuitively you think, well, just leave the room. And you'll see in the sequence that I'm describing that the brain doesn't work that way, and trauma affects you in that moment. So I was heartened by what she said on that front.
I think for the first time in a really long time, we're having a very honest conversation about what sexual harassment really looks like. And I think it lived in a very black and white box for many years, and we're finally talking about the nuance and about the gray and about how we don't always do the right thing, and that doesn't take away from the event. It doesn't take away from the actual abuse that took place. Just because we didn't do the right thing or we didn't play it like a character in a movie. And I think all of those things are to me it feels very optimistic, because until we have a really truthful conversation about these things, that it is complicated and that it's not easy and that it looks different and it feels different and it sounds different, we will never get to rectifying this and fixing this and changing this for future generations.
And John, as a man in telling this story, how have you felt in the reaction that you've received from people who've watched the movie and maybe said they learned something that they didn't know about this entire dramatic scandal, specifically about Roger's character, who's so complicated? It wasn't a terrible monster all the time, and that's what's so tough about this, is that he had moments of kindness and generosity. So tell me what you learned about him, but also how have you been heartened by the reaction?
Well, the reaction has been what we wanted it to be. There is this general sense it is so important that this movie was made. And I just have to say, this movie would not have been made if it weren't for this person.
Yes, Charlize saved it.
And I don't know, I'm very glad that I'm talking to you now before you see the film. Because after you watch this film, you won't like me anymore.
John, we could never not like you. You're the most likable person in the entire world.
Well, actually, we've had conversations about that. I'm a sort of pleasant, not to say ineffectual person in person, and that was that was an excellent element in playing the role of Roger. It was very important that you see lots of different facets of this character. In preparing it and researching it, we did find that there were so many people who defended Roger, who were loyal to him, were devoted to him.
Because they didn't see that side of him.
They never saw that
he
side.
He didn't treat them that way.
And he was a very powerful, very charismatic, and very expert person. But like on one of our trips to New York for press, I was picked up by a driver at the airport who had driven and done security for Roger Ailes. He was almost his go-to man. This man adored Roger. He found Roger so generous to him, had actually left him something in his will. And it was very important to bring that in. It was easy for me to embrace the role of the villain of the piece. As many of you may know, I played lots of villains in my day, and I know that a good story needs a good villain, and I'm a real good villain. So I knew that was my role, that it really is a woman's film. The great characters in this film are not just the three magnificent woman stars of the film, but there's about a dozen women who play characters whose stories are very fully told, but all of them react in their own very particular way to Roger and to the influence Roger had on the culture at Fox. And ultimately, he's had an enormous influence on our national culture. And I knew that was my job. I had to inhabit Roger, warts and all. But you also had to see the aspects of him that people respected and loved.
And by the way, we heard the same stories about Harvey Weinstein. He paid Jason Mewes, Kevin Smith's best friend, Jason's mother's medical bills when she was dying. There were many stories about Harvey, about generosity. And I think that's how these things they don't negate each other.
And not just
you can be a good person on one day and also do a terrible thing the next day.
Yeah, and not just generosity. I tracked down an old friend of mine who worked as his business partner in the 1970s when Roger was an aspiring New York theater producer, of all things.
Hard to forget that day.
And he described Roger as being fabulous company, a man whom you could laugh with for out of control for 40 seconds at a joke. It was important to bring that sort of buoyancy to the character too.
And he seems to be married to a woman who seemed kind and smart and
played by a fabulous actress.
Played by Connie Britton, who would never lead us astray in any performance, obviously. Never, ever. But I do love that we saw the full dimension, and the way Charles wrote the script was really obviously calculating and showing us those moments. So
it's so powerful too, because I think the seduction that a lot of these predators use. We don't talk about that a lot. Again, it's like we want to think of our villains as just these bad guys. And I think the moral dilemma that a lot of these women face, especially Megyn Kelly, was that she liked him, that he was a good guy, and even though she had this horrible experience with him of sexual harassment, she still, before we made this movie, whenever she spoke at women's forums and things, she would always be very honest about the fact that she did like him and that he did contribute so much to where she ended up in her career, and that she could trust him and that he invested in her. She felt fully invested by him, and that's the same stories that we're hearing about Harvey Weinstein. It's a story that kind of repeats itself, and you start to realize the danger in that seduction, that guy that's in the powerful position who makes you feel good and makes you feel like there's going to be value to this relationship. And then he abuses it.
I would love to talk about one of the heroes of this production, Kazu.
Yes.
So for those who don't know who he is, tell us about him and how he helped you in your performance.
Kazuhiro is, yeah, look at you guys. He designed and built all the prosthetics for my character, for John. He also did Nicole's.
Richard Kind.
Yes. I think he built, close to 30 pieces.
But he was brought out of retirement to do this.
So I felt very...
Little pressure.
Well, yeah, exactly. And then I felt really good about myself that I pulled him out of retirement. And then I read the same story like 3 movies prior. Like Gary Oldman tells the same story, how he pulled him out of retirement. And I was like, I feel like he's pulling that Cher thing where he's like, this is my final tour. And then it's not his final tour.
But it makes it so dramatic
It
when he
makes
says
it
yes.
so dramatic. He's so good at it. But he's an artist. He's a sculptor, and he has these incredible shows. He makes incredible sculptures, and he is really such a beautiful human being who's just so good at his job. It's crazy. I mean, there were moments where I had to look in the mirror and I couldn't see the edges or the lines where your skin began and the prosthetic began, and we just kind of nerded out as actors on that. Because like I would walk in and see John, and John would be like, look at this. And he'd shake his face and he's like, look at my gels. Look at my gels. My gels move when I shake.
Like a turkey.
We were just like so impressed by it, and it
It's
is so helpful
It's
as an
crazy.
actor.
You're used to being vain. But, we were so excited. Of course, you did look beautiful when he was done with you. Watching this Megyn Kelly YouTube piece, it was astonishing. I was just reminded what a miracle job he did with Charlize. They were indistinguishable.
What do you remember about your first meeting with him in terms of because he is an artist and he first looked at your face, which is a beautiful face, of course, but did he say to himself, okay, I'm gonna have some distinct challenges for X reason, creating this piece?
So he had spent some time just with photos of me and her, and so he had a couple of ideas. So the first time I met him, we actually did I Instagrammed this, internal nose cast, where they put putty inside your nostrils to get a cast of the inside of your nose, because he knew that he wanted to build these 2 little plastic pieces that would be inserted into my nose to widen my nostrils. And so we started with that. That's where we began. And
Became very close friends, I'm sure, after that.
oh no, it was very intimate. He was like, you need to wax because the putty gets stuck in your nasal hairs. And I was like, I didn't even know you could wax in there. And then,
This is LA, you can wax everything.
apparently you can, yes. So so that's how I met him, getting a nasal cavity mold.
Talk about meeting cute.
Right. That's a very unique meet cute.
Yes.
And John, as the movie goes on, we see, and this is obviously just to also dramatic effect, Roger's posture changes. He becomes more hunched as he becomes more defeated. How did you work with prosthetics, but also how did you change your own gait and the way you carried yourself as the narrative progressed?
Well, I don't really remember working that consciously on it. It was just playing those scenes. The scenes were, as always, an actor just feeds off what's written for him. You just, when you feel embattled and besieged and beaten down, you just sort of wilt. And you'll see me wilt in the next few hours. My other great Confederate was Colleen Atwood, who was the costume designer, but she, in my case, she was way more than a costume designer. She was a body designer. We had long, long fittings for my fat suit. And I'm happy to say I look very different in the film than I do in real life.
You look very different. How much did that fat suit weigh, by the way?
Oh, it was quite light.
It was.
She gave me the opportunity of wearing a fat suit the same weight as actual flesh.
Wow.
And I thought, yes, I really must do that. And then I thought better of it, thank God. It was a terrible idea. So it was very comfortable.
You really
I felt very light on my feet.
Right, the day you removed that, you probably felt like you could just...
Yeah. At the end of the day, unzipping it and taking it off was like the best diet ever designed.
The
Most
easiest.
efficient.
I would love to know, in the last few months, as you've been talking about this film and interacting with fans and industry people, what has been a reaction that has surprised you or has really heartened you in terms of, yes, that's exactly what we were hoping? Because I know early on a lot of people were like, well, I don't want to feel empathy for Megyn Kelly. That's the last thing I feel like feeling. And that kind of was like the first month, and then it's interesting how the tide turns with these movies. There's like an ebb and flow of love and hate for all these Oscar movies. La La Land had its moment, and then people hated it and then loved it again. How have you seen the tide sort of turning and evolving as the narrative of this movie becomes more prevalent, either among fans or industry people?
It's hard to sense, but I must say it was quite a significant thing for Megyn to have done this piece. It was very, very supportive of the film, even though, I mean, I would hate the experience of sitting in a movie theater and watching an actor pretend to be me. It's almost impossible to be objective about it. But it was very significant that she acknowledged it was very important that this movie be made, and that she had these three heroic women on doing this courageous thing.
Who were devastated while they were watching.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
sobbing.
and the other poignant thing, I mean, it's actually quite wonderful that there's this companion piece to the experience of watching the movie. So I do encourage you to watch this. Megyn herself, you will hear the word twirl in this film, and I won't tell you what that's all about. But Megyn said that she herself had experienced this what appears to be an inoffensive moment, but that even now, to this day, she still feels how demeaning that was to her. And you'll see there's a scene in the film that's entirely structured on the whole idea of a twirl.
It's been really, I mean, obviously, we see it, right? We feel it. The last year and a half, there's just been this real need for women to not be silent anymore and to just own their stories and to not kind of play by this taboo of what we've lived so many years of, you know, you don't talk about this stuff, or it doesn't mean anything, or you're just gonna like mess up your life, like don't say anything. This kind of silence that has been so poisonous, and everywhere we've gone doing these conversations with people, there's this real need for women and men to just want to talk about it. And I always think, you know, that's always the first step. If we can keep this conversation going, then this movie really, then it was worth it. It really, I think that's ultimately going to be the most important thing, because if we don't continue the conversation, we will fall into this complacent state again, and it's so dangerous. But it doesn't feel like that's going to happen. You know, I was just reading some articles in the car about all the protests outside of Harvey Weinstein's trial yesterday, and it just feels like we're in this great moment where women aren't being shamed about these things anymore, and we finally just, you know, we're coming together, we're supporting each other, and to see all the men supporting this too. We were talking a little bit in the green room. That to me has been the most touching part of this whole experience. To see all the allies that we have out there, and even in the Megyn Kelly piece, to see her have her husband take part in it, and to see him as such an ally for this cause. We need you guys, and so I'm just so grateful that there are so many men out there who care so much about this. yeah, so.
And also moving away from just the man as, you know, offender, woman as victim. I mean,
No, 'cause-
predatory behavior
yeah.
exists on all levels and in all circles.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
having also men, if they've had experiences, share them with us. And
And
how
even
did
if
it
they-
happen and how did you feel?
Exactly, it happens to all of us, but even if the men that I've met on these conversation tours who haven't had an experience themselves always say to me, I always think that could be my daughter, or that could be my mother. And that's how we're so interconnected on this issue. And so that to me has just been really incredible.
And what do you think, because I'm all about applying lessons to our regular lives as is possible, in our workplaces, whatever those look like, whether it's, you know, blue collar job, restaurant, office, what can each of us do on a daily basis to combat these aggressions, whether macro or micro? Because they could be small things that people are, you know, sweep under the rug, or they could be the boss who is harming people in large ways that we're just not privy to. What can each of us do in our regular lives to help this?
You know, that's the question, right? And I wish I had this like one answer that we could all, but unfortunately it's not that simple. But I will say the one thing that I think is incredibly brave, and I was personally very moved by the stories outside of the Harvey Weinstein story of women who were in upper positions who were told by women in lesser positions that they were being harassed, and then they believed them and actually got behind them and actually really put their own jobs on risk out there, and because it's the right thing to do. And so the only thing I would say is that we have to start taking these things seriously. Of course, you know, we want to live in a world where we believe that there is a due process, but we have to really start believing women a little bit more. And if there's an issue that we have to step forward, and if we're in a position where we can help and not just sweep it under the rug, we have to do, that's just the right thing to do. But I think all of us want these old institutions in our workplace to not exist anymore. And I think we all have to slowly work towards that. And I think the pressure that's been put on a lot of these institutions have now, and now that there's consequences for a lot of these actions too, I think are showing that we're kind of done with it. I also feel like the younger generation, it's like a rally, this story is like a rally cry for them, and I think they just will refuse to want to go back to that. So I think we all have a part in this.
And I also think too, and we see glimpses of this in the movie, is making sure that if someone has gone through something, to make them feel less alone. And just maybe find a trusted colleague or a friend and say, and also just for a record of it happening. Because think about now how all these cases, they've gone back to the friend, and the friend can confirm, yes, 18 years ago, my friend told me that this happened to her today. So sort of like, don't keep it to yourself, I think is important.
I feel like there is definitely less of a stigma now. I want to believe that. I feel like women have examples now where they can look to and say, okay, well, she did that, and that really helped her. And so we're smarter about these things now because we know more. We just didn't have that 2 years ago.
How about John? What's your sage closing thought?
Well, one question I've been asked a few times in forums like this is, what sense do I have of how things have changed? And although there's still lots of changes that have to happen, I am finding the show business that we're in is changing enormously.
So you can feel it?
I definitely feel it. I think the first woman director I ever worked with was a good 40 years into my career, and that was on Dexter a few years ago. A wonderful British director named S.J. Clarkson, who'd already proved her mettle in England. She was brought over to direct an episode well into Dexter, by which time the template was long since created by male directors. She was fabulous. Since then, I've worked with about 10 or 12 women directors. And that is an enormous change. And the subjects of films. Bombshell is not the only woman-centric film out there. You just sense there are much better roles for women. There are women's stories being told. Little Women is a remarkable
Women of all
film.
sizes, little and big. Yeah.
And you just feel there's something in the water, and it's all to the good.
And your anecdote about not having worked with a female director, do you think men are more aware now of actually saying, hey guys, I just saw the breakdown for season 1, and there isn't a single woman on this roster. Do you think
It's
men are
very
actually
noticeable.
more open to bringing that up in the meetings now?
Things that were just taken for granted, it's very noticeable when there's that kind of imbalance, and there has been for decades.
And I would have to say, a lot of the male actors I speak to say they not necessarily prefer working with women directors, but it offers them a different experience on set. I won't say it's better or worse for them to decide, but it definitely changes an experience.
In my experience, the atmosphere on the set of Bombshell was incredible.
Jay Roach is an incredible, he is
Jay-
not a woman, but he's an incredible man.
He did a great job. Well,
But we had mostly female producers.
yeah, and Charlize was always there. I mean, a great producer, always in the other room watching.
I just didn't want to get fired.
But it's, you know, it's all to the, I read this astonishing fact recently that in the first dozen years or so of the movie industry at the beginning of the 20th century, women were kind of in charge.
Tons
It's
of
like
screenwriters. Yeah.
Screenwriters, directors, the
Studio heads.
scenario writers, because it's like the film industry was thought of as a frippery. It was not, people didn't see what an economic juggernaut it would become. As soon as it turned into that, it became a male-run operation. And I just feel there is a shift happening. Thank God, after all these years.
Yeah. And also, just for the record, if men think we want to take their power from them, we're just trying to share it. So I think that's the other thing. This term patriarchy is thrown around, and I know a lot of men bristle at that term because it has this sort of aggressiveness to it. I don't think that's what we're trying to do. We just want to share. I think it just becomes back to this thing we learned as kids, like, let's just share. Me taking my opportunity isn't taking yours away. So I think as long as we all try to infuse that into our daily lives, I don't know, I have faith. On that note, hopefully inspiring note, but before you watch this really stressful movie, thank you all for being here. We can't wait to see what you think. Tweet at everyone, share your thoughts online, because it is a great conversation to keep going in social media, and please do have a great conversation about this on the way home, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the movie.